Hello, welcome. This is going to be, I think we probably got one more week in Black History Month. And I've been digging into some of my race based materials over the past month and, discussing some things. I think we went over Powernomics. We went over some other Black books, I believe. Now we're going to go over Race Matters by Cornel West. Specifically, we're going to go over two chapters of this book. I'm not going to go through the entire thing. But chapters 3 and 4, which is about the crisis of Black political and intellectual leadership, and then his critiques of Black conservatism. This book was written in 1993. I believe I have the 2001 version. Um, so keep that in mind, and I will keep saying that again and again that this book was written in 1993. But I don't see how anything has changed. If we're being honest, I believe it is exactly the same today as it was in 1993. If we're being honest, I believe it is exactly the same today as it was in 1993. So we're going to go through this book, and it's an interesting couple of well, I'll say paragraphs, interesting couple of chapters here. But you're going to see, quite frankly, what a lot of Cornel West, what he thinks and why he thinks that way. At the time, I want to give a little backstory while people are coming in. This was one of the first books that I actually read. I think it might have been the second. Um, I remember seeing Cornel West and Michael Eric Dyson on television. Obviously, I've told the story 100 times. I saw Michael Eric Dyson on television. Realized he was from Detroit. I was like, oh no, that's great. And I wanted to read his book, and I saw that he had a book. It was called was it? I think it was similarly titled to this, like Race Matters or Race. It was Race Rules. That was the Michael Larry Dyson book, and I remember picking that up and reading that. But I'm not sure if that was after or before Cornel West. Um, and again, I was in my early 20s. I was working in a auto plant. I was making what they call headliners, which is the roof of the car, the interior roof of the car. And I was basically reading this on my lunch break. And and this was before I even went to college. So I really was dabbling in this stuff long before I actually became either politically aware or fully understanding in the stuff that I was reading. So reading it now is much different than reading it then, for obvious reasons. Um, this is the first time I've revisited the book in a long time. I haven't read the entire book in forever, but you deciding to talk about this. Now, what happened is I wanted to talk about in one of Cornel West's books, he was talking about the relationship between blacks and Jews. And Kanye West was going off about Jews and all that kind of stuff. I figured I was going to talk about Jews. And I was like, you know what? I can't do that conversation justice without mentioning the Nation of Islam and their trio of books on the relationship between blacks and Jews. And I don't have those books. So I put that to the side. Maybe I'll do that next year when I decide to pay $30 for a book, which is never. And I ended up, because I had pulled this book off my shelf, just flipping through it and was like, hey, this might be interesting to talk about. Because he's talking about the crisis in black leadership, political and intellectual leadership. And I was like, okay, let's talk about this. And I read the chapter. Again, I noticed that chapter 4 was, him critiquing black conservatism. Like, I just roped that right on in too. Why not? But I was working in an auto plant when I started reading this stuff. And I have this little tug of war in my dad. And it's kind of an off and on thing. I'm not gonna get too personal with it, but I remember when I first dropped out of high school. My dad he was on my case because he thought I was too smart to drop out of school. You know, and he gave me so much grief over dropping out of high school. He wanted me to go to community college, and I was miserable at the job, and there's no way for me to go to community college while I was working because I was working 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. It just was not going to work. So when I heard that the plant was closing, I started to prepare myself for life after the plant. And that's when I started really hunkering down and reading more, you know? That's when I picked up a lot more books. I started going to the library. I started going to book sales. I really started preparing myself because I wanted to go to college. And my dad was kept pushing and pushing and pushing for me to go to community college. And then I said, you know what? I'm gonna do better than that. I'm going to go to the university. And that's when I got the whoa, 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 you got too much dip on your chip. And that was one of those push and pull things. Like there's a book called Public Enemies by Brian Burroughs, I'm sorry. It's about the universe of the FBI, John Dillinger, all that kind of stuff. He saw me reading that. He says, "Oh, you're not reading real books. I thought you were serious. You're not reading real books." And then he saw me reading Cornel West. And he's like, "I can't believe you're reading this. Do you even understand it?" Like I don't think you have the capacity to understand this book. And I'm like, "Fuck you. I'm gonna read this." And I finished it cover to cover. Did I understand it? Not 100%, but I understood enough of it. And I, of course, read more Cornel West books after this, more Michael Eric Dyson books after this. But it was part of the push and pull of the relationship with my dad. And so these books, even though I don't agree with everything that's in them anymore, they have a special significance because they brought me to the point that I am now. These were my starting points, right? Reading things like this, it really pushes me. It pushed me when I went to college because then I realized that when I was in college, even though I was older than all the other freshmen, I read and they didn't. You know, I was already familiar with Stephen Biko, Amy Césaire. Um, I was already reading. I had already started reading like the Federalist Papers, all these things that I thought you needed to read to succeed in college. I was already reading this stuff, you know. Um, and then of course college expanded my base of, hey, look at the Franz Fanon, look at Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, all this kind of stuff. I was not introduced to any sort of um, conservatism, I guess you could say. I was basically taught that if it's mildly left, then it's pretty balanced. Because I remember reading a book in an English class that was essentially mocking George Bush because he was president at the time, and that was sort of the general idea was if you only mock George Bush mildly, if you just say he's incompetent, that's pretty much balanced because the extremes are George Bush is Hitler, right? So I pretty much had the George Bush is Hitler in my brain already from watching garbage TV and reading garbage books and garbage articles. So that sort of stuff really kind of stuck with me, but I think that it makes me fairly balanced. That if you come like saw my personal library, you will see Cornel West and Thomas Sowell. You will see Michael Eric Dyson and Walter E. Williams. You will see crazy conspiracy shit. Like, well, for a while I had the ISIS papers. I had, they came before Columbus. Because I was reading all that stuff. And then you also found like Jordan Peterson. So you get the idea that I actually read stuff. I read opposing views. And that's one of the reasons why I never get rid of these books. Even though, I don't agree with them, but I never get rid of them because, one, they're part of how I got where I am today. Two, is always important to realize what the people who disagree with you, how they think about you and how they think about the issues, right? this is something that is a blind spot in leftism in general. Is they don't know how to read conservative material. They don't even engage with it, really. Most of them don't. Now, today, I don't engage in too much far left material. There's so many people that are just so profoundly stupid. I don't even engage with it. So stuff like, Ibram X. Kendi, I'm not engaging in that. That's just it's too stupid, right? Like Cornel West, I think has enough substance to engage with him, to agree. Michael Larry Dyson in the past, I believe, had enough substance for you to engage with them. The New Jim Crow from Michelle Alexander, great book. Don't agree with it, but it has enough substance for you to get in there and tangle with some of the ideas. And then there is these Ta-Nehisi Coates, woke journals that are just full of horrible. It's almost like he just saw a lynching happen, and then he sat down to write in his tears. It's like get the fuck out. It's not realistic. It's ridiculous. So I just wanted to give some background to how I came to, how I read these books and what my thought process is in reading them today is I understand this book now. I understand the words that he's using now. But more importantly, I know what he means now. And I learned a lot about how Marxists engage intellectually. And I still like Cornel West, even though I hate his economic ideas, his social ideas, and all that kind of stuff. I still like him. So there's that. 12 minutes, I think we did enough preamble. Let's get into this thing. So Race Matters, again, was written in 1993. I have a 2001 version of the book. Chapter 3 is The Crisis of Black Leadership. It begins on page 53. We're going to go, I took some notes in it, but I'm going to go through it. So I'm going to read from the beginning chapter, not from the beginning of the chapter, but from the beginning of a paragraph. He says, there has not been a time in the history of Black people in this country when the quantity of politicians and intellectuals were so great, yet the quality of both groups has been so low. How do we account for the absence of Frederick Douglass's, Sojourner Truth's, Martin Luther King Jr.'s, Malcolm X's, and Fannie Lou Hamer's in our time? Why hasn't Black America produced intellectuals of the caliber of W.E.B. Du Bois, Anna Cooper, E. Franklin Frazier, Oliver Cox, and Ralph Ellison in the past few decades? I want you to realize that a lot of the people he just mentioned here are socialists. All right. E. Franklin Frazier wrote a book called Black Bourgeoisie, where he basically attacked Black conservatives and middle-class Black people. Of course, he's preaching Marxism. W.B. Du Bois ended up being a communist. Martin Luther King is a communist. Frederick Douglass is not a communist. Neither is Malcolm X. So, but there's a couple of communists here. There's no conservatives here. Notice, there's no conservatives here. And he is aware of them because he mentions some of them later. So he knows they exist. He just doesn't think they're worth talking about. So he discusses the growth of the Black middle class. And he says the civil rights movement permitted significant numbers of Black Americans to benefit from the American economic boom, to get a small yet juicy piece of the expanding American pie. So he's giving the growth of the Black middle class is not going to the broader, growth of the American economy and the auto industry, and all that sort of stuff. No, it is because of the civil rights movement, which is a nebulous sort of belief. I'm not so sure that you can do that. But he starts talking about later on, he says, like any American group achieving contemporary middle class station for the first time, Black entree into the culture of consumption made status an obsession, an addiction to stimulation, a way of life. Well-to-do Black parents no longer sent their children to Howard, Morehouse, or Fisk to, quote, serve the race, though often for indirect self-serving ends, but rather to Harvard, Yale, Princeton to get a high-paying job for direct selfish reasons. So if you send your child to Yale or Harvard or Princeton, which, they fought forever to get integrated, they wanted these colleges integrated, right? And now it's self-serving, it's selfish to send your kids to these white universities. Then what the fuck was the point of all the marching to get these schools integrated? If you didn't want people to send their kids there, why do you agree with integration? What was the point? I don't get it. What was the point? All right, so we're going to continue. He says, in this way, the new class divisions produced by Black inclusion and exclusion from the economic boom and the consumerism of hedonism promoted by mass culture have resulted in new kinds of personal turmoil and existential meaninglessness in Black America. So the Black middle class growing led to Black people spending more money and engaging in more sexually liberating things like, having multiple sex partners and stuff like this. But which I don't think that's true. I don't believe that's true at all, especially since the middle class has always been married more often than the poor. I don't believe that. So he says quality leadership is neither the product of one great individual nor the result of odd historical accidents. Rather, it comes from deeply bred traditions and communities that shape and mold talented and gifted persons. Okay, that's true. You have to actually breed good leadership. I don't understand why Black people need leaders in the first place, but that's where we are with this thing. He says, without a vibrant tradition of resistance passed on to new generations, there can be no nurturing of the collective and critical consciousness. Only professional conscientiousness survives. Without a vibrant tradition of resistance. Resistance to what? Resistance to what? And he's a passed on to generation. So each generation has to have a tradition of resistance. What are you resisting? He doesn't say, right? And collective consciousness. What is the collective consciousness? What does that mean? What it means is everybody thinks the same, right? Why should everybody think the same? And critical consciousness, well, it's just basically Marxist, right? You to criticize things, in a political sense. That's critical consciousness, is to engage, in a Marxist way with the world, your worldview, your environment, etc. So he wants a collective group-based thought process that engages in the world in a Marxist way, because that's the tradition of resistance that he's talking about. He's talking about, the Black Panthers and Martin Luther King, who are communists. All right. So now he's talking about the Black political leadership. He says Black political leadership reveals the tame and genteel face of the Black middle class. The black dress suits with white shirts worn by Malcolm X and Martin Luther King signify the seriousness of their deep commitment to Black freedom. You got to realize Cornel West talks like Dusty Rhodes, cuts a promo. So he says, Malcolm and Martin call for the realization that Black people are somebodies with which America has to reckon, whereas Black politicians tend to turn our attention to their somebodiness, owing to to their making it in America. Now, this whole black people are somebody, that's a Jesse Jackson thing, that I am somebody. I am somebody. So he starts talking about there being 3 different kinds of black political leaders. I'm going to really shorten this up. And he talks about the 3 kinds of black political leaders. What page is that on? Page 64. So he says, like black politicians, black scholars fall into 3 basic types: race distancing elitists, race embracing rebels, and race transcending prophets. He said, and so race distancing elitists. Throughout this chapter, he basically says that they're the talented 10th. So W.B. Du Bois created this concept called the talented 10th, where Du Bois believed that 10% of the black population shall lead the 90%. And these people, as he's saying, is that these individuals who think that they're better than everybody else, that's why he used the word elitist, and they're going to lead the other black people. So he says these people have a severe denigration of much of black behavior. So basically, they're critical of black behaviors. So now we're talking about black conservatives. Like immediately, as soon as you start saying that, you're talking about black conservatives. Because black conservatives, one of the first things they do is they criticize your actual behavior, right? How you dress, how you speak, how you approach the world. That's mostly what black conservatives talk about. So as soon as you see severe denigration of much of black behavior, for starters, there are no black behaviors. That's one of the things that, again, you learn that from Thomas Sowell. He did, what was his book? Black Rednecks. That book where he basically, lays it all out, that a lot of the ignorant behaviors that black people learned were Southern behaviors that they picked up from living next to poor whites. So it's not necessarily a black behavior. But this is how, again, people like Cornel West engage with the world. There are black and white behaviors. That's why you see today, almost 30 years later, well, it is 30 years later, these people who believe that showing up to work on time is whiteness. You have black rednecks and white liberals. They believe showing up on time is upholding white supremacy. They believe that, working in like the service industry or something like that is demeaning. All these ridiculous things that these people believe for no good reason, because it's critical thought in their mind. Black people shouldn't be punished for showing up to work late, which is the most ridiculous. Black people shouldn't be punished for having braids or crooked wigs at work, and because you have the Crown Act now, right? This kind of stuff. So then he also talks about race distancing elitists being uncreative, establishmentarian, and held up by their white colleagues. Now, this is an interesting bit because white acceptance comes up quite a bit when he talks about black conservatives. Even though nobody is accepted more about white America than people like Cornel West, that's his frame of reference, is that when he's talking about Glenn Lowry, which he directly addresses in this book, or Thomas Sowell or whoever, Stanley Crouch or whatever, he always talks about these guys wanting to be seen as equals to whites or something like that. When in reality, there would be no Cornel West without white people. Who the hell made him a professor? Right? Wasn't Negroes. They don't own that university that he was a professor in. So it wasn't them that was upholding him. So when he said they're held up by their white colleagues, who is the professor at an elite white university? Thomas Sowell is one, but so is he. So you, so again, you have to think about this, right? So then he goes into part two. The second type of the black intellectual is the race embracing rebel. He says they resent their white academics, their colleagues, but reproduce similar hierarchies headed by themselves. And he gives an example of W.E.B. Du Bois, who claimed that he didn't really like white people, even though he just created more organizations and furthers thought where he's himself is at the top. That's where he came up with the concept of the talented 10th, right? So I'm going to actually read from the book now. He says, um, they, meaning the race, the embracing rebels, fall much more into the tradition of those old stereotypical black college professors who thrived on being, quote, the big fish in a little pond. That is, race embracing rebels express their resentment of the white academy, including its subtle racism, by reproducing similar hierarchies headed by themselves within a black context. They rightly rebel against the tribal insularity and snobbish civility of the white academy and and the first type of scholars, because again, race embracing rebels, they don't like race distancing elitists. They didn't mention him because they always forget him. But if you're going to use W.B. Du Bois as an example here, understand that the first thing, the race distancing elitist, then would be Booker T. Washington. But that wouldn't be true because Booker T. Washington did not distance himself from race. In fact, he was, firmly entrenched in race. And so was Marcus Garvey, who also got into an argument over the years with W.B. Du Bois, right? So this is an interesting bit here. So then he starts talking about the third type of black intellectual leader, which he calls the race transcending prophet. I know it sounds pretty ridiculous, but this is Cornel West we're talking about here, okay? So he says the race transcending prophets are often self-styled and self-taught. They're beholden to no one, and they live a life of mind with, wait a minute, I'm going to use his exact word. So let me find the exact wording here. He said he uses the examples of Leroy Jones, who ended up being American Baraka, and James Baldwin. He says he was a self-taught, self-styled, hence beholden to no white academic patronage system. He was courageous and prolific, a political intellectual. When the engaged leftist Amiri Baraka was a petite bourgeois, bohemian poet, and the former Black Panther Eldridge Kiefer became a white right-wing Republican. He says he was unswerving in his commitment to fusing the life of mind, including the craft of writing, with the struggle for justice and human dignity, regardless of the fashions of the day or the price that he had to pay. So basically, he's saying that they're martyrs and that James Baldwin was a martyr. James Baldwin was a martyr because he was gay, and therefore he was basically eschewed from most real conversations because he was black and gay and married to a white man. I think he married more than one white man. One of the most cringe things on the internet that you see floating around all the time is this conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. We're talking about relationships. Both of them are gay. And they're having this back and forth about how, black people should think in these relationships. What do either one of you know about being in heterosexual black relationships? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's one of the most ridiculous videos I've seen on the internet for a while. And people act like it's super profound. I'm like, these two dramatic actors sitting here playing roles. Both of them are gay. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But let's talk about this. So basically, the race transcending prophet is basically a martyr. And you see often with Marxists, they use the word struggle a lot. Hitler loved the word struggle. Mein Kampf means my struggle. They love the word struggle. They're always struggling. They're always fighting. They use these really incredible verbs. You watch the Young Turks, they always talk about how they're fighting. We're going to fight Trump. We're going to resist Trump. All these really strong verbs because it sounds good. It sounds like you're doing something. You're not really doing anything, right? There is no outcome of this. So after this, you need to realize that Thomas Sowell, well, he's a really old man. Like he's very old. He was old in 1993. All right, I think he was in his 60s at that point in time. He would have cleaned Cornel West's clock. For starters, the way Thomas Sowell via Frederick Hayek explained intellectuals is that these people who pay no cost for being wrong and who output is purely written or lectures, they don't actually have to operate in the world. So when you realize that Cornel West and talking about people like these race transcending prophets, these so-called martyrs, they don't actually create anything. Like the legacy of James Baldwin is that he wrote a couple of books. That's it. He didn't create anything of note that really furthered Black people, especially materially, right? But he's a race transcending prophet. Martin Luther King obviously is a race transcending prophet, right? But I guess he would view Malcolm X as more of a race embracing rebel. Once you understand that the intellectual class, they don't view it as their job to actually better your material life, even though they talk endlessly about your material struggles. They don't attempt to help at all because it doesn't really benefit them. If you start to rise up on your own, then they can't make any money talking about how you can't rise up. So you don't really go anywhere. So, but the interesting bit is that he focuses on intellectuals and political leadership and not on, let's say, economic leadership. Black millionaires or Black billionaires are Black people who own magazines, Black people who own TV stations. I believe BET existed in 1993, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure. Somebody look that up for me real quick. See if Robert Johnson, But there were Black millionaires. It was a Black millionaire that he wrote a book. Why do white guys get to have all the fun? I believe there was a TV show, maybe not in 1993, but it was at some point in the early to mid 90s where, one of the first Black conservatives people run into had a TV show. And you know how quickly they snatched him off TV. Yeah. Yeah, BET was in 1980. So BET existed in 1993, which gave a voice to Black people in the music space. Now, again, it was created because these people believed, the Black musicians or whatever, believed that they were not getting fair treatment by MTV. So BET was created by a Black billionaire to give them their own space. That means this existed during the time Cornel West is talking about, but it goes unmentioned. A Black man owned a cable network, and it goes completely out of the window. Not worth talking about, not worth discussing. So there was a lot of forward-thinking Black people, but they weren't quote unquote intellectuals, meaning they weren't academics. They didn't sit in lecterns all day. And most Black conservatives, are not really into the lectern thing. Most conservatives in general don't want to work in colleges and universities. They typically go work in foundations, and some of them working like Glenn Lowry and Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell all were professors, but they all, of course, ended up going to work for foundations and stuff like this too. While black intellectuals, quote unquote, professors, they end up in these universities forever, like Cornel West and Michael Larry Dyson or whatever, right? So when it comes to the intellectual tradition, which we're going to talk about later when we talk about conservatives, the conservatives kind of do it to themselves because they pull out of the universities. Sometimes they're forced out, but most of the time they pull out. Or they get tired of arguing with their peers. You know, they get tired of, the having to debate every single thing that they say, even though they might technically be right or whatever. The pressure and the stress of working in an environment where pretty much everybody disagrees with you, they just pull out. They just give up. They say forget it. There's other ways of spreading my message. And they start going into like talk radio and writing articles in magazines and stuff like this. But that stuff it generally has a limited reach, as opposed to the very wide reach of black liberals, right? But Larry Elder had a TV show, and that didn't last very long. And he had a TV show because he was so popular on the radio. But then, of course, you hear that if you talk about Larry Elder, you'll just say, well, he was held up by Rush Limbaugh. He wouldn't exist without Rush Limbaugh. That's true. He will admit that Rush Limbaugh helped him get on the radio, helped him get started. Pretty much every major you can rarely find somebody who was black who didn't get their start working alongside of somebody white. If under that umbrella, I can't tell you how many, maybe Marcus Garvey might be like one of the only people, because it's a question about whether W.D. Fard Muhammad, who started the Nation of Islam, whether he was white or not. There's some questions about whether he was like very, very light skinned or whether he was actually a white man. It depends on when you asked, the Nation of Islam this question. Like when they want to talk terribly about W.D. Fard Muhammad, he was a white man. They talking about him pretty good, and he was just a light skinned guy, right? But so that Elijah Muhammad might have gotten his start from a white man. But Booker T. Washington, all of his patrons were white. Well, not all of them, not every single one of them, because some black people own newspapers and stuff like that, and they helped Booker T. Washington. Frederick Douglass, a lot of his patrons were white. W.B. Du Bois, a lot of his patrons were white. Like it's this sort of thing that exists, is that black people often don't have access to large audiences, and the white people guide them in. They'll get it started. They often are the people who spread the word. You wouldn't ever have heard of Frederick Douglass if it wasn't for white people going around basically building the audience for him, spreading around his writings, taking him in front of people so that he could speak. The same thing with Booker T. Washington. These people wouldn't exist. You never would have heard of them. They'd be a footnote in history, like so many other black people who did, incredible things or said interesting statements about, the issues that they engaged in. But you have that issue. So he starts talking about political leadership. I think it's page 59 that I wrote. Page 59, Black political leadership. He says, Black political leadership reveals the tame and genteel. I already read this shit. Basically, he talks about there being 3 different types of black political leaders. He said one is race-effacing managerial leaders. Okay. Now, what a race-effacing managerial leader is, which sounds pretty ridiculous, but he says the first type, which is the race-effacing managerial leader, the Thomas Bradleys and Wilson Goods of Black America have become a model for many Black leaders trying to reach a large white constituency and keep a loyal Black one. This type survives on their sheer political savvy and thrives on personal diplomacy. This kind of candidate is the lesser of two evils in a political situation where the only other electoral choice is a conservative, usually white politician. Yet this type of leader tends to stunt progressive development and silence the prophetic voices of the Black community by casting the practical mainstream as the only game in town. So these are your Democrats, essentially, right? Your Black Democrats. And these Black Democrats and Black conservatives, pretty much, because the next one is actually Black progressives. So you're talking about these individuals who they play to the middle on every issue, right? They don't look for when he means by prophetic, he means progressive. That's what he's saying. Like these guys never speak in clean English. So when he says by casting the practical mainstream as the only game in town, it's basically saying there's mainstream responses to things. Those are the only responses that we got to work with. So in our day, 2025, we deal with lunatics going out there talking about abolish the police, abolish prisons. I'm in the prison abolitionist movement. Ain't that what's that dork? What is his name? Mark Lamont Hill. He's an intellectual, quote unquote, but he's talking about being a political. He's about being a prison abolitionist. That just sounds stupid on paper, but when somebody actually tries to run for office on that absolutely lunatic fringe, they will find themselves a nice, clean cut Black. You know, he's not as progressive as those psychos. He doesn't believe that men can become women and all that other crazy stuff. But he has some pro LGBT beliefs, but he's tempered it down. You know, he's just like you. He's a normal guy. Again, what they call the lesser of two evils, right? There's a lot of politicians. That's basically Obama right there. You know, that's kind of Obama-ish. But Obama was actually very much a progressive. He did a really good Mott and Bailey, where he played like he was just a managerial leader, where he wasn't a crazed progressive, but his politics was basically crazy progressive if you paid attention to it. So the second is the race identifying protest leader. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? He says the race identifying protest leader often view themselves in the tradition of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, and Fannie Lou Hamer. Yet they are usually self-deluded. They actually operate more in the tradition of Booker T. Washington by confining themselves to the Black turf, vowing to protect their leadership status over it, and serving as power brokers with powerful non-Black elites to enhance this Black turf. And he used the example of Louis Farrakhan, who was making deals with Libya, right? So you see this all over the place now. Pretty much a good 60% of Black Democrats today are race identifying protest leaders, according to Cornel West. They're almost always backed by Blacks, and they almost always have a mostly Black constituency. So they'll have a mostly Black district. And then they make these deals with the anti-Israel committees or the LGBT in order to broaden their appeal. But openly, they are crazy progressives who ramble on about defunding the police, abolishing prisons, and all this other lunatic stuff, right? There's plenty of these people, and this stuff has been going on in America forever. But I talked about this before when it came to the Black Panthers starting to get into politics. They were big on the race identifying protest leader. You show up, put your fist in the air, and we're all revolutionaries, but we don't know what the fuck the revolution is. We don't know what the revolution means. We don't know what that looks like. We just fight, fight, fight. You know, all the action verbs: resist, fight, stand up, combat. You know, all that, all these empty words. But it all sounds very aggressive and very progressive and feel like they're gonna actually do something. You got all these bald broads in politics now with these fake wigs and the Jasmine Crockett's, the Ilhan Omars. And people are psychotic, man. You know, and they end up in Congress or end up in like city councils and things like that because they have a mostly black district. In Michigan, we had Coleman A. Young, right? He was essentially a race identifying protest leader who basically forced all the white people out of Detroit. Now he didn't write a law that says white people have to leave, but he made it so uncomfortable that white people left. He made it so uncomfortable that many suburbs didn't want to do anything with Detroit anymore. They were building structures to keep, you know, Detroiters in Detroit. You know, but that was his political base. He was the mayor of the city. And the city was becoming more and more black, and then it became 80 or some odd percent black, and then he really went nuts. But he was a crazy socialist. And then there were socialists on the city council in Detroit in the 80s. Hell, there's socialists there now. These people who keep channeling Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Battle of the Bullet, and I might not get there with you. All this dramatic, you know, pastor, fake pastors, and all this kind of stuff. But that's what Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. This is what they wrought. They brought us the Black Lives Matter candidates. You know, these guys who, and there's been plenty of them that have run for office under the Black Lives Matter banner, and they ended up being dirty. How many Black Lives Matter mayors end up being corrupt? There's at least 3 that I've seen. At least 3. Who knows how many on city councils or school boards? But this is what they do. They identify as black, but they use their blackness as a means to parlay deals with what they call third worldism. That is, they stand up and they start ranting about Palestinians, or they start talking about poor Mexicans or poor Puerto Ricans or whatever, in order to build these coalitions, because they need those coalitions in order to stay in office. Because usually, even if there's a mostly black district, if you piss off enough people, you could still lose it. You know, so you mystify people with race, and then you parlay that into, I want to push the black LGBT agenda, and people who think that they're standing up for themselves end up, you know, you're standing up for Palestinians and transgenders, and you're like, wait, what the hell? And it's a classic rug pull. So then you got 3, which he also calls the race transcending prophets, which he says the same thing here. He says race transcending prophets are rare in contemporary America. Harold Washington was one. The Jesse Jackson of 1988 was attempting to be another. Yet the opportunism of his past weighted heavily on him. To be an elected official and prophetic leader requires personal integrity and political savvy, moral vision and prudent judgment, courageous defiance, and organizational patience. Again, look at these verbs, right? Courageous defiance, moral vision. Moral vision, when they always are trying to appeal to morality, and they don't have any objective morality. You would think Cornel West has objective morality because he says he's a Christian. He does not engage in objective morality. It's all subjective. And when you're a Marxist, everything is subjective, right? There is no objective morality. So the idea that he would say you have to have moral vision is humorous. But the issue is you put Jesse Jackson in here with with personal integrity. He's an extortionist. He has no personal integrity. He had a baby out of wedlock, and it was, I think it was revealed while he was on the campaign trail. Wasn't it? Something like that. He ended up having a baby out of wedlock. No, I'm not so sure Jesse Jackson has personal integrity. There's not a lot of these race transcending prophets because so many of these people, if they try to downplay their race, and they end up in the conservative box. You almost are forced to embrace being black. So the idea that you're going to be race transcendent is pretty ridiculous. So this is why these are the struggles of black intellectual crisis. I'm sorry, intellectual and political crisis. Now, he says that the reason why these crises exist, he gives this, and here he says one is the eclipse of the U.S. economic dominance. He basically uses the oil crisis, where OPEC, drove up the cost of oil by shutting off oil during the Carter administration, as it did tremendous amount of damage to the economics of the United States, proving that the United States is not the economic power that it once was. Of course, this is written 30 years ago, and the oil crisis, I believe, was 20 years before he wrote this book. So I don't think so. And plus, America still had the strongest economy in the world at the time. The idea that oil providing, or oil exporting countries had any kind of power of the United States was, it didn't last long if it did exist. I can tell you that. So then he starts saying, so it was the eclipse of the United States economic dominance. Then he says the structural transformation of the United States economy. Basically, that there are now fewer jobs. There's no, the agrarian jobs, farm jobs, stuff like that disappeared. At this time, they're starting to see the hollowing out of industry. You start seeing people, the auto industry in the middle America bleed workers, and that the working poor were deeply affected by the economic foundations of the United States weakening, and people's survival instincts took over, which is basically him. He's not saying that. Let me be open. He's not saying this, but he's implying it. He's going to make an excuse for crime. So that's when you say survival instincts take over. That's an excuse for crime. And then the third part is the moral breakdown of the black community, which he says, he blames on the mass media, which is humorous. But he says that black conservatives favor playing respectability politics, which they frame as white acceptance. So let's talk about black conservatives, because this is an actually interesting bit here. As we are going to, man, this is 54 minutes. It's been a while. So he talks about the rise of black conservatism, which he says comes due to the crisis of African American liberalism. He says The new black conservatism is a response to the crisis of liberalism in Afro-America. This crisis, exemplified partly by the rise of Reaganism and the collapse of left politics, has created an intellectual space that conservative voices of various colors now occupy. So you have to understand they view conservatives as reactionaries, which is they are in opposition to progressivism. They push more toward tradition and right judgment and objective morality and these sorts of things. They don't like that. They don't like that at all. So then he starts talking about his criticisms of Glenn Lowry's book, Free at Last, which I have not read. And now that I know that it exists, I'm probably going to get it on Amazon. So he gives a short summary of Glenn Lowry's book, where Glenn Lowry posts apparently makes three arguments. One, that black liberals adhere to victim narratives, which we know is true, and they still do that today. Two, that black liberals have a loyalty to race, which is causing them to have blindness to black dysfunction, which we know is true because that still happens today. And three, that black liberals censor opposing views, mostly through labeling black conservatives as Uncle Toms and coons, which of course we know is true because they're still doing it today. So we're going to focus on, now he chose to respond specifically to Glenn Lowry, even though he knows that Stanley Crouch, Shelby Steele, and Thomas Sowell exist. All right. He did not touch those guys, but he picked on poor Glenn Lowry, which is fine. Because I'm pretty sure Glenn can handle himself. I kind of wanted to read Glenn's book to see how he would have responded to this. This was so long ago. I wonder if he even remembers that he was attacked by Cornel West in his book. But here are some critiques that he has of black conservatives. He says, unfortunately and ironically, Lowry deploys the very rhetorical strategies he denounces in his liberal adversaries. He's calling them a hypocrite. He says, for example, he casts black conservatives and neoconservatives like himself as victims whose own failings to gain a fair hearing and broad following in Afro-America, he attributes to a black liberal conspiracy to discredit them in an ad hominem manner. It's a conspiracy, even though we know that these guys have been calling conservatives coons forever. This is all the Black Panthers did, was call people coons and threaten to kill them. You would imagine that this guy has never read a Black Panther newspaper. He's old enough to have read a Black Panther newspaper. I have read Black Panther newspapers. They're online for free, by the way. If you wanted to read like Black Panther newspapers from like 1968, 1970, whatever, I think they have the entire run on Marxist.org. You can go through there and look at them call black conservatives or people who are black people who don't stand with them coons and Uncle Toms. And there's movies where all the black guys are coons and Uncle Toms. I don't know what time when that movie Get on the Bus came out. It was in the early 90s. I'm not sure if it was, I think it was around maybe 95, where they had a quote unquote Uncle Tom character who was like a black businessman and conservative. He got on the bus, niggas need cars like cars need niggas. And then he got thrown off the bus. He was the only person that got thrown off the bus. There was a gangbanger on the bus, a dude that was beating his girl or something like that on the bus. There was all kind of crazy people on the bus. The only person who got thrown off was the black conservative. The only one. They used to make movies like The Drop Squad, that if you wanted to be race neutral or a conservative or something like that, there a bunch of black socialists would kidnap you and basically re-educate you. And you'd be like, what the fuck? I mean, think about when Kanye West put the red hat on. What happened? CNN exploded. This is what happens when Negroes don't read. But he's trying to say it's a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory, guys. So his response to this is that he says, surely the black community is not so gullible, manipulatable, and downright callous. It may simply be that the real merits of the case put forward by the new liberal conservatives are unconvincing and unpersuasive, which is his article, his entire argument at this point is that black conservatives are not convincing to large parts of black America and they're unpersuasive. Now, the second part, unpersuasive, is absolutely true. People don't want to hear that they're at fault for their own problems. They don't want to hear that. They're not going to be persuaded by when somebody is telling you that something is not your fault. That's easier to absorb than somebody telling you you have to fix this. Even when it comes to relationships, right? I've seen like that new twist in a relationship coaching. Well, they'll say, don't use the word you when you're criticizing somebody, because then they take it personally, they get defensive. When black conservatives start criticizing specifically behaviors that they see in the black community, sometimes they'll say these things and people will get defensive. Again, I said this before, like when Michael Eric Dyson wrote an entire chapter in a book defending black women, naming their children Shaniqua, Shakisha, and all this. He felt like he had to find a way to explain it instead of just shrugging and being like, look, I don't know how to explain that. He started saying that the word Shah, it means God. So they're talking about God when they use Shah and Qua. Like, what are you talking about? That's bullshit. They don't know nothing about that. That is not their intention. It is not their intention. Their intention is to give their kids some kind of unique name that they think is cute. So now you got grown women running around here named Shakari with an apostrophe in her name, right? When Bill Cosby was criticizing people for allowing their children to steal, that's when we first started hearing about Bill Cosby being a rapist, and that's the only reason you heard about Bill Cosby being a rapist, because Bill Cosby was paying for black children to go to college, right? He had a TV show. He was the father of America. But he would not shut the fuck up when it comes to being a conservative. Oh no, they wasn't going to have that. That's when you started hearing, oh, Bill Cosby's a rapist. They did it. They sicked Michael Eric Dyson on him. He wrote a book called "Is Bill Cosby Right?" I remember having that book. I gave it away. I've had a ton of books that I've given away, but he wrote an entire book dissing Bill Cosby. He wrote an entire. They did it again though when Cornel West was dissing Obama. They sicked Michael Eric Dyson on him too. Notice how that worked out. They also sicked him on Jordan Peterson, but that didn't work out. So the idea that black conservatives are not persuasive is a good point, because people get defensive. But what he didn't say that they were incorrect. He said that they're, quote, unconvincing and unpersuasive. It's easier to believe that there's a conspiracy against you than it is that you're doing something wrong. To be honest, though, if you sit down and talk to people who have fucked up their life, they realize that they fucked up their life. Oh, yeah, Bill Cosby said a lot. He said a lot of stuff that, especially when he got older in the early 2000s. Oh, yeah. Remember, they made, and you might not know this, but Stinkmeaner from the Boondocks is based off of Bill Cosby. You know how Bill Cosby used to wear those big block glasses because he was going blind? Now, you probably don't remember that. Some of y'all are not old enough, but he used to wear these big block glasses because he was going blind. And he was giving these speeches. And Bill Cosby was a progressive at one point. In the 60s and the 70s, he was a progressive. He would sit there on stage and make all the white supremacy excuses. And then here it is in 20 some odd, and he's heard all the rap music, and he's seen all these movies, and he's seen how these children were being sucked into this negativity. He tried to save what was that? Was it Janet Bonet? Was that her name? The light skinned girl, Lisa Bonet. Lisa Bonet from the Cosby Show. She ended up doing some kind of topless scene in the movie, and Bill Cosby got mad because he didn't want her to do it, and he became some kind of paternal patriarchy. He was paying for her to go to college, and she started doing topless movies. He's like, I'm not going to pay for it anymore, and he became a villain for that. But he saw that they were luring black children into this debaucherous. I mean, look, Bill Cosby was doing what he was doing in the 80s, but this was the 90s, early 90s, So he saw what was coming down the pike for black children. He was trying to keep them out of it. And they were like, no, we're going to destroy you. We would rather destroy you than see you pull these black kids out of the danger. So you never noticed that Bill Cosby was based with stink meaner? I noticed it immediately because I remember the Bill Cosby doing the lecture circuit wearing those big old glasses, and I was like, oh, that's very convenient. And again, the Boondocks is very topical, so there's almost always an analog in there somewhere. There's always an analog in there somewhere. But yeah, Bill Cosby, because Bill Cosby was a big deal at the time, and taking out Bill Cosby was very important to push their progressive agenda, because Bill Cosby was a tentpole. Like, he was America's dad, including white America, right? When they destroyed Bill Cosby, that was it. He was the pillar of black male fatherhood, and they destroyed him. And look, part of it was his own fault for engaging in, drugs and sex with all these strange girls and all these women and stuff. He had no business doing that shit. But it was a different time. He's trying to learn from experience and tell young people don't do that stuff. And when they took him, and it's almost paralleled perfectly. Soon as Bill Cosby fell, the gates flew open with all the degeneracy. Soon as Bill Cosby went down, it was over. You almost never saw a black man. Well, you see him in Tyler Perry movies as fathers, but most of the time there's no black fathers in commercials. There's no black fathers in TV shows or movies. Or if he is, he's sort of a effect male. Like, there's sometimes you'll see like Everybody Hates Chris. Like, there's a good black dad in that show, and he's funny. But then you started seeing a lot of weird stuff happen. The man's naturally abusive to his family. He's abusive to his kids. He's a secret rapist. He's a secret homosexual. All that stuff. It all happened when they got rid of Bill Cosby. Once they killed him off, it was over. So I can buy that. But his second one is, he says, Lowry's rejection of blind loyalty to race is laudable, yet he replaces it with a similarly blind loyalty to nation. In fact, his major criticism of black liberals and left liberals is that they put the black community out of step with present-day conservative America because they adopt an excessively adversarial stance to the rest of the country. This criticism amounts to not a deepening and enriching of black intellectual exchange, but rather a defense of new kinds of restrictions in the name of neo-nationalism already rampant in America. A neo-nationalism that smothers and suffocates the larger American intellectual scene. Neo-nationalism Well, that's Nazis. That's what a Nazi is. It's a neo-nationalist or a national socialist. That's really what it should be. But they call them neo-nationalists sometimes. All right. It smothers and suffocates the larger American intellectual scene by not bringing up crazy conspiracy theories and lies and half truths. You're smothering and suffocating the larger intellectual scene. It's again, when you're dealing with Marxists, they don't want to be bound up by objective reality. They want to have these absurd arguments that even the ones that happen on the very fringe, like Thaddeus Russell is not black. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen Thaddeus Russell, but he has, did these sit downs. He did a sit down with Jordan Peterson. He did one with Joe Rogan. He's a philosopher, and he's a Marxist philosopher. He probably doesn't think so, but he is. And basically just says no such thing as objective truth. That's on the extreme fringe of thought. Like that kind of stuff shouldn't even be engaged with. How can you engage with somebody who said there's no such thing as objective reality? There's no such thing as objective truth. Like that's psychotic. You're never going to get anywhere. How can we be having this conversation and there's no such thing as objective truth? Then what are we doing? What are you basing your argument on? How can you provide evidence of your argument if there's no such thing as objectivity? Then we can't even agree on anything. You can't even. So that means from step one, when you talk about in philosophy, you have to at least agree on the battleground. We can't even agree on the battleground because you don't even accept that things are real. So they play on the fringes. And they play on the fringes all the time. This whole transgender stuff is playing on the fringes. They're trying to abolish the sex binary. Like they found some kind of third being or something like that in the universe. They have not found anybody who did not have a penis or a vagina. There is no third. There's no third option. Yet they will have you believe it is because they like to play on the fringes. Because in the universities, they pay no cost for being wrong and they don't have to produce anything. The only thing they have to produce is books. And you can write anything in a fucking book. Once you realize that these guys can write whatever they want in these books, you realize that just because it's in a book doesn't mean that it's true. So he continues. This is actually my favorite part. What page was that on? I want to discuss this. So he says, most Black Americans view the new Black conservative assault on the Black liberal leadership as a step backward rather than forward. Okay, he provides no sort of citation. Was there some kind of poll that was done? I don't think so. Now, Black conservatives are not well liked. Even in 1993, they were not very well liked. There was, again, Larry Elder getting screamed at on TV. There was when Thomas Sowell would be on television, they would be yelling at him all the time. Like people do not like having the liberal order critiqued. The liberals want to do the critiquing. They don't want to be critiqued. They don't want to be told that they're wrong and that their ideas don't work because they believe that they have moral clarity and that they're morally correct all the time. So they don't want to be told that they're wrong. Right? So he says Black liberalism is inadequate, but Black conservatism is unacceptable. Unacceptable, he says. Black conservatism is unacceptable. He said this negative reaction to black conservatives by most blacks partly explains the relative reluctance of some of the new black conservatives to engage in public debates in the black community and their contrasting eagerness to do so in the mass media, where a few go as far as to portray themselves as courageous, embattled critics of a black liberal establishment, even with their salaries, honorariums, and travel expenses are paid by well-endowed conservative foundations and corporations. That is, in some ways, an attack on Thomas Sowell, right? Because Thomas Sowell was pretty much one of the only black conservatives, and Walter Williams, going on television arguing with liberals. And again, Thomas Sowell was doing that in the 60s. All right. He had already done this shit. He already been, talking to Congress, arguing with liberals on television, white liberals, black liberals. He had done all this stuff 20 to 30 years before this book was written. Right. That's how old Thomas Sowell is. Right. The Larry Elders, he argues with white people, especially white liberals, on the radio all day, every day, and has been doing it for 30 some odd years. They engage in very public debates. Now, what he says here is their relative reluctance of some of the new black conservatives to engage in public debates in the black community. In the black community. Basically, we want to surround you in a 10v1 situation where where you have to hold your own, which they very well could, but then people start getting real tight. Look, there have been people who have threatened Thomas Sowell over the radio and threatened him through the television and all that kind of stuff. There are people who have called him a coon, called him an Uncle Tom. He's been through this shit. Thomas Sowell really just kind of stopped doing this stuff a long time ago. He just kind of sat back and started writing his books. When he does interviews, you have to go to him. Like he doesn't come to you to do interviews. He's like 90 some odd years old now. I think the last interview he did was it might have been over the phone. I think he did an interview with Dave Rubin. I think he may have did one with Dave Rubin. That might have been relatively recently, but I don't think he's done a public interview in a long time. No, he did one for his newest book, which was maybe like a year or two ago. But he doesn't travel that much, and he basically explained it. He doesn't engage in debates with these people because he's been doing it his entire adult life. Like eventually, you get tired of arguing with these idiots. Their arguments have not grown or expanded. They have not disproved anything that he said. They basically just yell at him and repeat the same things over and over again. And because so many of them have Borg brain, basically they all share one brain cell, which is unfortunate because some of these people are really smart, but they all think the same thing. They're all working from the same framework. And because they're all working from the same framework, you argue with one, you're pretty much arguing with all of them because they're all going to make the same fucking argument. Right? So there's just no point to it. The man is 94, bro. Like that's I really do hope he gets the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He deserves it for arguing with idiot socialists for 40 fucking years. Spent his entire adult life arguing with fucking liberals. Jesus Christ. So this is pretty funny. He says the black conservatives claim that the decline of values such as patience, deferred gratification, and self-reliance have resulted in the high crime rates, the increasing number of unwed mothers, and the relatively uncompetitive academic performances of black youth. And certainly these sad realities must be candidly confronted. But nowhere in their writings do the new black conservatives examine the pervasiveness of sexual and military images used by the mass media and deployed by the advertising industry in order to entice and titillate consumers. What the fuck does that have to do with anything? Oh, black people act this way because they were watching too many movies. Now, here's the weird thing. 1993, gangster rap was in full swing, right? I don't know what month this book was published in, but I'm pretty sure Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg were on TV a whole lot when this book came out, right? Tommy Soul has never done a rap album, but Cornel West has. Think about that for a second. Tommy Soul has never done a rap album. Cornel West has. I remember a white man played it for me in class, and I didn't even know it existed. And I'm like, why the fuck is Cornel West? And he's not rapping. He's basically talking over the beat, and then the rapper steps up and raps. And it's supposed to be like the old school X-Clan style hip hop stuff, but that's these guys trying to engage the youth because they see validity in it. And that's why you see Michael Eric Dyson with all his high-minded intellectual effluvia quoting Jay-Z, you know? And he does it all the time. He'll sit here and spit Tupac lyrics at you. He writes books about Nas and Tupac and all that kind of stuff too. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. There's definitely some cultural conversations that you can have about, rappers, because not all rappers are the same. But when you talk about the advertising industry enticing and titillating consumers, he said black conservatives thus overlook the degree to which market forces of advanced capitalist processes thrive on sexual and military images. Hmm. Interesting. Now, I will have you. The thing is, when it comes to Cornel West doing rap albums, even the so-called intellectual rap is still violent. Public Enemy is still kind of violent. Boogie Down Productions used to have guns on the album covers. So there's an element of it where it's kind of dicey. Like he wasn't going full, gangster rap. He also, and I will say this, I want to give him credit for it. He talked Prince into doing songs. Cornel West did. The Cornel West Prince songs are actually quite good because it's Prince, right? But go listen to those. That's some homework. Go listen to Cornel West, and he did songs with Prince. But he did this stuff all the time. He talks about, and Prince, for God's sake, he made a song called Darling Nikki about a woman masturbating in a hotel lobby. And he says, black conservatives thus overlook the degree to which market forces of advanced capitalist processes thrive on sexual and military images. Prince wrote a song about a woman being retarded and he was having sex with her. What was that? Raspberry Beret, right? Get real. And both of those songs came out before this thing was written. Darling Nikki came out because I think it was on Purple Rain, wasn't it? Darling Nikki was in 1985 or 86, and Raspberry Beret might have been just a year or so later. Prince was, and he cross-dressed a lot. He wore women's clothes. And he was a small man, but he wore high heels, tons of makeup, and And he basically saying that all it's the market forces that are forcing our young people to doing this stuff. No, 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 no. They were doing that stuff before the market forces came in, brother. A lot of like the black exploitation movies, like the Mac and stuff like those, are really low budget movies. You know, the money came later when they started really putting some real Hollywood money into these black degenerate movies. He continues by saying, "My aim is not to provide excuses for black behavior. There's no such thing as black behavior, or to absolve blacks of personal responsibility. But when the new black conservatives accent black behavior and responsibility in such a way that the cultural realities of black people are ignored, they are playing a deceptive and dangerous intellectual game with the lives and fortunes of disadvantaged people." Listen to this shit. Disadvantaged people, deceptive and dangerous. It's nothing deceptive or dangerous about it. You can watch the Mac, listen to Snoop Dogg, and not engage in any negative behaviors. People do it all the time. None of this stuff has it. Okay. Okie dokie. And yet, Cornel West is extremely silent. He's still alive too. I think he's in his late 70s. How old is Cornel West now? He's got to be in his late 70s. He's got to be almost 80. He just ran for president, for God's sake. I don't see him standing up and saying anything about Megan Thee Stallion. When it came time to respond to the Glenn Lowrys of the world, it was all about capitalist pressure from advertising and television. Well, we have more of that now than ever before because you have it all over Instagram, all over Facebook, all over Twitter, all over YouTube, and some of us are on all these things simultaneously. Some of us are on all these things all day, even when they're at work. So the degeneracy is much more now than it was then. Even during the era of Freaknik. This is hilarious. He continues by saying, "The ideological blinders of the new black conservatives are clearly evident in their attempt to link the moral breakdown of the black communities to the expansion of the welfare state." So then, he actually does address Soul here. He says, in Soul's work, the preeminent structure element of political economic life relevant to the plight of the black poor is the negative role of the state and the positive role of the market. He says, can the market do any wrong? Well, yes. Oh, he's 71. He's younger than I thought. Yes, the market can do things wrong. The market does incentivize negative behavior. It incentivizes people to replicate. So you started seeing a lot of fake gangster rappers because the real gangster rappers were out there. You started seeing a lot of fake images because real images were out there. You started seeing a lot of copycatting of things like school shootings. You started seeing a lot of copycatting of pimp behaviors. But trust me, that stuff existed before it was popularized and pushed through mainstream media. Yes, the market can be wrong. Yes, the market can incentivize terrible things. You have to be stronger than the influences that are around you. And again, I'll tell you, like, the never, this is the one, again, I've told this story countless times. I lost respect for Michael Eric Dyson when he made that excuse that him and his brother have different lives because he's light skinned and his brother is dark skinned. They grew up in the same house with the same parents, had the same social pressures. I don't think they're that much farther apart in age. And Michael Eric Dyson, when pushed, says, "Well, I'm light skinned, he's dark skinned." So that means that the world skipped over him when it came to their racism and put it all on his brother. And his brother was in prison. So sure, but 99, sure, the market can be wrong. It can incentivize really bad things. That said, it's all on you to resist negative behaviors. So when people say things like, for instance, why is what was this Boys in the Hood? Why is there a gun shop and a liquor store in every hood? Well, if you put like a fresh produce store, you might do okay. But then you see people eat more bags of chips than bags of broccoli. And that's why people are fat. you know, People make bad choices. You go to a supermarket where you have these decisions. Now, some people don't have supermarkets. That's a market issue that comes much, much later. But if you go to, when I was a kid, you go to a store called Farmer Jack, right? In Farmer Jack, I could go get a bag of Doritos, a pack of M&Ms, or I can get a bag of grapes, which grapes are still not really that great for you. I'm getting the M&Ms and the Doritos. I'm sorry. Grapes, I love you. My mom loves grapes, but right now I don't got great money, and M&Ms are cheaper, sweeter, and I can share them with my friends. I'm getting the M&Ms. Going to go and make some bad decisions. So get the M&Ms. I got the choice. They're talking about this right now, though, right? When it comes to Robert RFK Jr., he's trying to block um, junk food purchases with food stamps, right? Which makes common sense to most people. Most people would say, okay, but then you would have to say stuff like, what about cereal, like Frosted Flakes? All right, you don't want a mom to buy Skittles with food stamps, but they can buy Frosted Flakes. Look at the amount of sugar in a box of Frosted Flakes and look at the amount of sugar in a pack of Skittles. There's more sugar in those Frosted Flakes, and those are directly aimed at kids as a breakfast food. I love Frosted Flakes. My God. And Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I love them. Those things are in some ways more insidious than candy. So it just begs the question, like, where are we gonna draw the line? That's kind of my question when it comes to what RFK wanted to ban certain things. But people got mad at that. They got mad, like, no, you should be able to buy your kids potato chips and chocolates and juicy juice and all that kind of stuff with food stamps. And people are like, why? Buy fresh produce. AJ3 says, what about original cornflakes? Well, cornflakes are not, I think they're sweetened, but they're not as sweet as Frosted Flakes. Frosted Flakes has a ton of sugar in it. Sugar Smacks, which I love. Golden Crisp, I think they're called, the one with the brown bear on the front. Those are delicious. Oh my God. It's all sugar though. Like things like Kicks, Kicks are actually kind of sweet on their own, but they're so much better when you add sugar to them. Oh my God. I love Kicks. But unless this shit's gonna be like really dry shredded wheat, and even shredded wheat is sweetened. Almost all cereals are sweetened in some way. But that would be my question: is some things have tons of apples have a ton of sugar in them, grapes, but they're naturally occurring. So maybe you say it's not that big a deal. It's not like a bag of potato chips, which has very, very high salt content and has very little nutritional value. Why is the government paying for you to eat junk food? Okay, I would just rather they cut the corn subsidies so this stuff can, you know, jack up in price and then people won't want it. But I don't know. That's neither here nor there, though. The issue, of course, is that the market can do wrong. Yes, the market can be wrong. He says they failed, they being black conservatives, they failed to see the welfare state was a historic compromise between progressive forces seeking broad subsistence rights and conservative forces arguing for unregulated markets. Well, it doesn't matter. They don't like the policy. I don't like the policy either. So it doesn't matter whether it was a historic compromise. Who cares? The compromise was wrong. He says they fail to see that the welfare state was a historic compromise between progressive forces seeking broad subsistence rights and conservative forces arguing for unregulated markets. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that the welfare state possesses many flaws. The reinforcing of, quote, dependent mentalities and the unsettling of the family are two such flaws. And that's acceptable, right? He said that black conservatism is unacceptable, but it's acceptable to create a system which destroys the black family, because he didn't say that was unacceptable. So he says, but simply to point out these rather obvious shortcomings does not justify cutbacks in the welfare state. See, you can't justify the cutbacks because you destroyed the black family and created dependency. You can't, that doesn't justify it. Why do you want black people dependent on the state? How does that benefit anybody? You think the government is racist anyway. You think the government is racist. You think that it hates black people, but you want them shackled to the government. That's one of the things that made me a libertarian. Once I said something, I was like, man, I don't really rock with the police. Like I understand the necessity of the police. I'm kind of iffy on them. Same thing with the FBI, and I can feel a lot more strongly about like the ATF or the DEA. I just don't see the value in those organizations. But the police, the FBI, I've read enough about crime to know that the FBI might be necessary. If you realize all the stuff the mob has been involved with, if you learn about the John Dillingers and the Babyface Nelsons, and the Bonnie and Clydes, and all the, yeah, we might need an FBI. Like we might need an interstate police force. We might just need to limit them to an interstate police force, though, right? We also have the marshals. They kind of do the same thing already, right? So once I had that vision, like I don't really trust the government. Shackling black people to the government doesn't make sense to me. So the welfare state doesn't make sense to me. If you think the government is racist and you think the government was experimenting on black people in Tuskegee, which is facts, you believe in mass incarceration, which I don't necessarily believe in, but I can see where people get that idea from. You believe in police brutality, which we know has some element of truth to it. You believe that black people are being harassed through driving while black or stop and frisk. You believe that black people are being oppressed by redlining, being oppressed in banking, being oppressed in real estate, being oppressed in the workforce. Why would you shackle black people to that system that you have continuously for 40 years said is racist? I don't get it. You should be trying to liberate yourself from that system. You should want to be as far from that system as possible. And you should want to limit the power of that system, not continuously expand it. But that would require recognizing reality and being somewhat objective. AJ3 says, where is his stance on mass incarceration that has destroyed black families the most? This is before mass incarceration. This was written before the omnibus crime bill, I believe that that Bill Clinton signed, that created quote unquote mass incarceration. But people were getting hit with the three strikes laws and stuff like that in the 80s and 90s in California, because that was crack and gangs and all that kind of stuff. But they hadn't labeled it mass incarceration yet, right? Mass incarceration would come later. At this point in time, they were more concerned. I'm trying to find another argument here. He says, what are we then to make of the new black conservatives? He says, I would suggest the narrowness of their viewpoints reflects the narrowness of the liberal perspective with which they are obsessed. So he says that their viewpoints are narrow. I don't think their viewpoints are narrow. I think that if you actually engage with their material, they come up with some pretty good policy proposals, and they don't just criticize liberals, they criticize government in general. They criticize people's adherence to state power, to communism, to socialism. It's not just their combative nature to liberals. What he's doing is he is framing black conservatives as if they are black liberals. Because black liberals, they engage in critical critique, critical analysis. This is all they do. Their job is to, when something happens, to criticize it, right? You fight for affirmative action, you get affirmative action, and then your critical analysis changes to, from we need affirmative action to we need to expand it from blacks to women, from women to gays, from gays to trannies, from trannies to illegals, from illegals to third world people, from people in the third world to aliens, or whatever the hell. You constantly have to grow the state through critical analysis. You go from, we should not be arresting people for nonviolent crimes, and then you start saying that certain crimes which are violent are nonviolent. Now, if you punch somebody in the face and steal their coat, that can be considered nonviolent because you didn't use a gun. You go from, the mass stealing that happened in California. Oh, because shoplifting was a nonviolent crime. We should decriminalize nonviolent crimes. Not prostitution, though, which, I'm kind of on the fence about. But shoplifting. So you got mass shoplifting because stealing is nonviolent. And you have to put in quotations nonviolent crimes, because then you got people like Big Meech, who never got caught murdering somebody, but you know very well that he was at the top of the food chain. He ordered people to get murdered. All right. But Big Meech, he benefited from like the Al Capone kind of system where they got him on something. It might not have been on what he actually did, but they got him on some stuff. So he continues, the emergence of the new black conservative signifies a healthy development to the degree that it calls attention to the failures of black liberalism and therefore encourages black politicians and activists to entertain more progressive solutions to the larger problems of social justice and class inequality. So the fact that black conservatives can critique you means that you have to go even further left. Not that you have to now engage with them. No, you have to go further left. You're not far left enough. You're not progressive enough. Oh, ridiculous. So he finally does actually talk about working together. He says, perhaps the widening of the split between black liberal elites and black conservative critics will lead to a more principled and passionate political discourse in and about Black America. Such a discourse would promote more rational debates among conservative, liberal, and leftist voices concerning strategies to enhance the life chances of the Black poor. The few valuable insights of the new Black conservatives can be incorporated into a broader progressive perspective that utterly rejects their unwarranted conclusions and repugnant policies. Look at that. There are few valuable insights. I mean, they'd have no valuable insights, not really. And their unwarranted conclusions and repugnant policies. Amazing. It's repugnant for you to want to decouple people from the state. But he admits that the welfare state has destroyed the black family, has admitted that black behavior is unacceptable. But no, it is the black conservative that is unacceptable. Why do you want to engage in respectability politics, which is the politics of Martin Luther King, by the way? They're never going to address that. That's the end of this chapter, by the way. But they're never going to engage in that. Like the civil rights movement was 99% respectability politics. They picked certain people to engage in, Rosa Parks was handpicked because she was already an activist, and then she was a married woman. She was light skinned. That helped. And the woman who it actually occurred to, she was, I think 15 and pregnant, but she was pregnant out of wedlock, and they didn't want to back her. They're like, no, nope, not gonna put my fat on the fire for that one. Let's get this pretty light skinned lady, and we're gonna have her recreate it so that we can get the outcome that we want. The hand-picking of certain people by political elites. Oh, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Pretty ridiculous, man, when you think about it. But what can you do? So that's it. Cornel West on the crisis of black leadership. His argument is that black conservatives should push you to be more progressive, which is exactly what happened in our most recent election, where these guys got drubbed for being too progressive and out of step with the normal individual person, thinking that people care more about trans issues and they care about the cost of food. They learned the hard way that people care more about the cost of food. But now their response is, and it's the same response all the time, you're just not progressive enough. If you see like the Young Turks or Sam Cedar or what's that other dork from Boston, David Packman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they all come to the same conclusion every time they lose. You aren't progressive enough. It's a cult. It's not that they're wrong. It's not that other people don't agree with you. It's that you weren't progressive enough. You have to be more progressive. You have to fight harder, fight, combat, resist. It doesn't make anybody's life better. People are going to respond to the material aspects of their life improving. That's what they want. Everybody wants their next generation to live better than they have. Part of what people like Cornel West and E. Franklin Frazier and all these people, when they attack the black middle class, they don't understand that. There is a new crop of black middle class people at that time because their parents worked to get them there. Their parents sacrificed to improve their lives and got those kids there, and those kids saw that. And they saw other people's parents smoke crack, shoot heroin, have a bunch of babies out of wedlock, borrow money that they couldn't pay back, spend money that they didn't have, and they failed. And it's continuing today. And the weird thing is, it's not a black behavior. That's the sickening part of this, is they start, labeling things black behaviors. If you read J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, a lot of the same things I just said, he talks about in that book. how his mom was a drug addict going from boyfriend to boyfriend. That's why he spent most of his time living with his grandparents. Seeing all the domestic violence, not knowing much about his real father. People spending money that they don't have. Constantly trapped voting for one political party because they truly believed that political party cared about them, and that the only reason they don't have utopia is because Republicans exist. Instead of utopia doesn't exist, they believe that utopia would show up. It would be here. We would have everything sustainable, environmental, everything, and solar and flying cars that are solar powered and all that. If only there were no Republicans and conservatives. If only they all just vanished. We will have everything we want. No, that's not reality. It's not reality. It's not real. And conservatives, and typically are a little bit more honest. They're the stern parents. If you look at it from a parental perspective, the left is usually the doting parent. They give you way too much credit for little things that you do right. You get way too much credit for it. And they're so free that if you do something wrong, they'll make an excuse for you. Oh, yeah, of course he shot up a school, but hey, man, his dad left him when he was 7. You know, he was a crack baby. Then they started saying crack babies don't exist. Once crack baby became an epithet, the left started saying crack babies don't exist anymore. They were blaming it on drug usage and the environment and everything. And then once they started to see more of it, they were like, and then, conservatives started saying it. Like, yeah, all these crack babies are in the street shooting each other. They're like, no, 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 no. Crack babies, they don't exist. Crack babies don't exist anymore. Like, well, fetal alcohol syndrome, that's real. Everybody knows that's real. But you don't think that babies can be born with some kind of deformity because their mom was doing heroin or cocaine? Well, that stuff is in their bloodstream, right? Um, okay, sure, go for it, whatever. Whatever you say. I mean, again, reality does not matter when you're dealing with leftists. It just doesn't. They will rather believe that you were licking paint and you got tainted from lead paint than your mom shouldn't have been shooting up with heroin or snorting cocaine or smoking weed or whatever. Maybe not weed smoke, but who knows? I don't know the science on weed smoke, but I'm pretty sure hard drugs, that stuff does affect the way that your child develops because it affects you. Those drugs go into your bloodstream. So, and it goes into the milk too. So if you're taking some of that stuff and you're breastfeeding, that stuff can still get passed through the milk. So 2 hours of this. I went to the bookstore today, John King Books in Ferndale. It's deadly cold outside. It was so bad. But I just couldn't sit in this house anymore. I had to go for a trip. But I didn't get this from John King Books because their goddamn card machine didn't work. Thankfully, a couple of blocks away was another bookstore called Library Books in Ferndale. And I got a book called Bearing the Cross, Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, written by David J. Garrow. It is a used copy of this book. How much did I pay for this book? $7.50. It is 600 pages. Once I get done reading Martin Short, the book on the rise of the mafia, I will be tackling this monstrosity. I'm also reading Black Abolitionists by Benjamin Quarles. It is an excellent history book. I'm reading that one at work, though. I got that one at my desk at the job right now. I take books to work and throw them in the goddamn drawers. And I read some when I have them with downtime, on my lunch break and stuff like that. But this book, Bearing the Cross, I'm going to definitely dig through this. But I also got another interesting book. It's called He, which it says Understanding Masculine Psychology by Robert A. Johnson. He is one of the guys who wrote the book. Was it King, Magician, Warrior, Lover? But this is basically a pamphlet. It's like 73 pages. I can read this and I probably read this whole thing tonight. But it's Understanding Masculine Psychology. I fully intend to read it. I love masculine psychology books. But this is basically a pamphlet. I'm certainly going to read this. So that's my reading list. I don't have any comics. I haven't been to the comic book store. I got to go to the comic book store in 2 weeks. I'm going to go to the comic book store next time I get paid. So next week, we're probably going to talk about Frieren. Dragon Ball Daima will actually be ending next week, so I'll be talking about that. Talk about the end of Dragon Ball Daima. What else? And that should be. Oh, yeah, I'm starting to watch Boardwalk Empire. I may give my thoughts on that. And that's it. Thanks everybody who sat through this entire thing. I appreciate you. Please hit the like button. Please donate on Cash App if you can. I am in dire financial straits. Both my mom and my girlfriend have cancer. So I am struggling. I'm in paying for medication. Oh, out of both ends. Because neither one of them got fucking insurance. So I've been paying for medications and all that kind of stuff. That's why, things get kind of weird. I'm at the point now where maybe I'm starting to think it was the clot shot, bro. I don't want to say that on record, but it just seems very strange that this would occur at the exact same fucking time. My mom's improving. She's doing very well. She had surgery. She had to have both of her breasts removed. She's still taking medications. She's gonna be taking these things probably for years and years, but she doesn't have to go to treatments anymore. Meanwhile, my girlfriend still does have treatments. She's gonna be finishing up her round of treatments probably next month, hopefully. But it's been tough, man. That's why I've been stressed out a lot. Because it's not just cancer, it's all the stuff that comes with it. The treatment makes the body weak, and then they lose control of their bodily functions, their confidence goes down. Both of them have fallen into basically depressions. My mom's starting to pull herself out of it. And then there's life happening during this situation. Like my aunt died while my mom was going through cancer. And that was very tough for her. And my mother-in-law essentially died while my girlfriend has cancer. And she's been destroyed by that. She's only been dead like a week or two. So it's like they're having these mirrored, experiences where it's really tough. And I'm stuck in the middle. I'm doing the best that I can, but I'm getting destroyed, bro. It's getting destroyed. And I refuse to get a second job. That's not going to happen. So I'm going to do the best that I can right now and try to at least get them to somewhat a level of having medication when they need it. But in terms of like other things, it's been tough. It's been a tough year and some change. I can't even tell you how much money I've spent on this stuff. Like it's gotten ridiculous. It's gotten absolutely ridiculous. It was extremely frustrating. But you realize it's a necessity. I'm a tight ass anyway with money. So I had plenty of it stacked away, but between the two of them, they didn't cut that. They didn't cut my savings in half. And it's easy to just say, look, it's got to be the American system when it comes to doctor's visits and medications and stuff like this, that would be the easy thing to do. Is to just blame that we need to have universal health care, but I would rather do it this way. I'd rather be financially destroyed than have them sitting in a queue somewhere, not able to get what they need because the government is rationing this stuff out. But thanks everybody who has given money so far. Hopefully people continue to donate and throw a little bit. This 6,300 of you guys, if everybody gave $1, that would be great. If everybody listening to this would just get $1, that would be great. But don't feel under any pressure or any sympathy to do it, because I know everybody has their own individual situations. But $1 or $2 could absolutely help. If it would just help me get them like bottles of water or something like that, that would be great. But thanks everybody. Thank you, WG Phil, for your sympathies. I will talk to you guys later.